Marcus Webb had spent 17 years perfecting the art of solitude. His cottage sat at the edge of Millbrook Valley, where rolling hills gave way to dense woodland, and the nearest neighbor lived 3 miles down a winding dirt road. The isolation suited him. After losing his wife, Catherine, to cancer 5 years ago, he'd found solace in his greenhouse, nurturing rare orchids and experimental hybrids. That required more attention than most people could offer. The night sky had always been his companion during sleepless hours. He knew the constellations by heart, could identify planets with naked eyes, and often fell asleep in his garden chair, wrapped in blankets, watching meteors streak across the darkness. But the light that tore through the atmosphere on that October evening was unlike anything he'd witnessed before, that it wasn't the clean, brief flash of a shooting star. This was violent, a jagged tear of blue-white fire that screamed across the heavens, leaving a trail of sparks that hung in the air like burning questions. The sound came seconds later, a deep, resonating boom that shook the windows of his cottage and sent his cat, Pepper, scrambling under the bed. Marcus stood frozen on his porch, his mug of chamomile tea forgotten in his hand. The object, whatever it was, had disappeared beyond the tree line, somewhere in the direction of his eastern fields. His logical mind suggested a small aircraft in distress, perhaps a military drone gone off course. But something primal in his gut whispered differently. He should call someone. The authorities. Emergency services. Instead, he found himself pulling on his work boots and grabbing the heavy flashlight from his workshop. The cool October air bit at his cheeks as he crossed the yard, his breath forming small clouds. The gate to his eastern property creaked as he pushed through, and then he was among the trees. The forest at night had never frightened him. He'd walked these paths countless times, checking on the wild ginseng he cultivated in the understory, monitoring the health of the old oaks. But tonight, the woods felt different. The usual chorus of crickets and nightbirds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching on tree trunks and low-hanging branches. 20 minutes into his search, he smelled at burning metal and something else, something sharp and unfamiliar that made his sinuses tingle. The scent grew stronger as he pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel, and then he saw the glow. His greenhouse, or what remained of it. Doc Marcus broke into a run, thorns tearing at his jacket. The structure he'd built with his own hands over the course of 3 summers was half collapsed, its glass panels shattered, metal frame twisted like taffy. But in the center of the destruction, something pulsed with a soft, otherworldly luminescence, not quite blue, not quite silver, but some color his brain struggled to process. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a compact car, but its shape defied immediate comprehension. Organic curves merged with geometric precision, surfaces that appeared solid one moment and translucent the next. Steam or some kind of vapor rose from fissures in its hull, carrying that strange smell. Marcus approached slowly, his practical mind cataloging details. No visible markings, no windows. Temperature radiating from the object, but not enough to ignite the wooden frames it had crashed through. His hands trembled as he reached out, stopping inches from touching the surface. Then he heard it. A sound so faint, he almost missed it beneath his own thundering heartbeat. A whimper, distinctly organic, carrying tones of pain. "Hello?" His voice cracked. "Is someone in there?" The whimper came again, stronger now, followed by what might have been words in a language his ears couldn't parse. Marcus circled the craft, his flashlight revealing a seam in the hull, a gap barely wide enough for him to see inside. He knelt, pressing his face close to the opening. The interior glowed with the same unsettling light, revealing organic-looking walls that seemed to pulse like living tissue. And there, crumpled in what might have been a seat or a bed, was a figure. She was roughly humanoid in shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but that's where the familiarity ended. Her skin held an iridescent quality, shifting between pearl and pale lavender, depending on the angle of light. She was tall. Even lying down he could tell that, with limbs that seemed slightly too long, fingers that tapered to delicate points. Her face, partially obscured by hair that moved with an underwater quality despite the still air, held features that were simultaneously alien and eerily beautiful. Her eyes opened. They were large, far larger than human eyes, colored like deep violet twilight. They fixed on Marcus with an intensity that froze him in place. He saw intelligence there, and pain, and something else, fear. "I won't hurt you," Marcus heard himself say, though he had no idea if she could understand. "I want to help." She tried to move, and he saw the problem. One of her legs was pinned beneath a collapsed section of the craft's interior. Dark fluid blood, he assumed, though it shimmered with strange properties, stained the fabric of her clothing, which looked like woven silk, but with embedded lights that flickered weakly. Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He gripped the edge of the opening and pulled. The metal, if it was metal, resisted at first, and gave way with a sound like tearing fabric. The gap widened enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick and warm, carrying scents of ozone and something sweetly floral. The walls pulsed with bioluminescence, responding to his presence with ripples of light. He crawled to the injured woman, his knees pressing against a floor that felt too soft, too alive. "Let me see," he murmured, more to calm himself than her. He examined the pinned leg carefully. The debris was light enough to lift if he braced properly. This might hurt. Her eyes tracked his movements with sharp intelligence. When he positioned himself to lift, she seemed to understand, bracing herself against the wall with her hands. Her fingers splayed wide, revealing delicate webbing between them that caught the light. Marcus counted silently, 1, 2, 3, and heaved. The debris shifted. She pulled her leg free with a gasp that sounded human enough to break his heart. Without thinking, he reached for her, helping her sit upright. Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth as polished stone, but unmistakably alive. She trembled in his arms. "Can you walk?" He gestured to his legs, then to the exit. Understanding flickered in those violet eyes. She tried to stand, using the wall for support, but her injured leg buckled. She would have fallen if Marcus hadn't caught her. They were face to face now, close enough that he could see fine patterns in her skin, like scales, but softer, more like the texture of rose petals. She studied him with the same intensity, her expression unreadable but not hostile. Then she did something that surprised him. She placed one long-fingered hand over his heart, feeling it beat. Her lips moved, forming sounds that might have been words. "I'm Marcus," he said, touching his chest. "Marcus." She repeated the gesture, her hand on her own chest, and made a sound like water flowing over stones. "Naya." "Naya," he repeated, and something in her expression softened. She leaned more of her weight against him, and he realized she was trusting him completely, placing her survival in his hands. Getting her out of the craft was awkward and slow. She was taller than him by several inches, and though she seemed lighter than her size suggested, carrying her through the destroyed greenhouse while avoiding sharp edges required all his strength. By the time they emerged into the night air, both were breathing hard. Marcus looked at his cottage, then at the glowing wreckage behind him, then at the alien woman leaning against him. Her blood, if that's what it was, staining his jacket. The smart thing would be to call someone. The safe thing. The legal thing. Instead, he adjusted his grip and began the slow walk home, supporting Naya as she limped beside him. With each step, he committed himself further to a path he didn't fully understand. But when she looked at him in the darkness, those violet eyes reflecting starlight, he knew he couldn't abandon. her any more than he could have left an injured deer to suffer. The cottage door swung open to reveal his simple, solitary life, a life that, he sensed, was about to become infinitely more complicated. Pepper peered around the corner, took one look at Naya, and bolted upstairs. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Welcome," he said softly, helping her through the doorway to Earth. Marcus had delivered calves in the middle of blizzards, stitched up his own hand after a greenhouse accident, and once talked a neighbor through a heart attack over the phone while waiting for paramedics. But nothing in his 53 years had prepared him for treating an injured alien in his living room. Naya sat on his worn leather couch, her iridescent skin catching the lamplight in ways that made his eyes water if he looked too long. Her injured legs stretched across the cushions. The dark, shimmering blood had stopped flowing, but the wound looked serious, a deep gash that revealed muscle or tissue or whatever lay beneath her pearl-like skin. "I need to clean this," Marcus said, gesturing to the wound, then to his kitchen. "Water, medicine." She watched him with those impossibly large violet eyes, her expression unreadable. When he moved toward the kitchen, she tensed, her hand gripping the couch arm. He stopped immediately, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm just getting supplies," he said slowly. "To help you. Help." He pointed to her leg, then mimicked wrapping a bandage dot. Understanding flickered across her face. She released the couch and nodded, a remarkably human gesture that eased some of his anxiety. At least they shared some common body language. Marcus gathered what he could: clean towels, a basin of warm water, antiseptic, bandages, and a bottle of whiskey, because he honestly had no idea what else to do. When he returned, Naya was examining his bookshelf with intense focus, her head tilted at an angle that seemed too far for a human neck. She touched the spine of Catherine's old gardening journal, her fingers trailing across the worn leather with something like reverence. "My wife's," Marcus said softly. The words still hurt after 5 years. She loved plants, gardens. Naya turned to him, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw sadness in her alien features. She touched her chest again, the gesture she'd used for her name, then made a sweeping motion with her hands that encompassed the room, ending with her palms pressed together and brought to her cheek. The meaning was clear. Someone you loved, now gone. "Yes," Marcus whispered. "Gone." They shared a moment of mutual understanding, two beings from different worlds connected by the universal experience of loss. Then Naya returned to the couch, settling herself with evident exhaustion, and gestured for him to proceed with treating her wound. Marcus worked carefully, cleaning the injury with warm water. Her blood was thicker than human blood, with a faint luminescence that faded as it dried. She flinched when the antiseptic touched her skin, but made no sound of pain. Her stoicism reminded him of Catherine during her final months, refusing to complain even when the cancer ate away at her from the inside. "You're brave," he murmured, wrapping clean bandages around her leg. "Braver than I'd be." When he finished, Naya examined his work with careful attention. Then she reached out and touched his hand, just a brief contact, but he felt a strange tingle, like mild electricity. Her lips moved, forming sounds that his mind couldn't translate, but her tone conveyed gratitude clearly enough. The clock on the mantel read 3:47 a.m. Marcus rubbed his face, suddenly aware of how surreal this situation was. An alien woman sat on his couch, her spacecraft glowing in his ruined greenhouse, and he was treating it all as if it were just another unusual Tuesday. "You need rest," he said, pointing to the couch, then closing his eyes and laying his head on his hands. "Sleep." Naya mimicked the gesture, then pointed upward to the ceiling and beyond. She made a sweeping motion across the sky, then brought her hands together in an impact gesture, followed by touching her wounded leg. Her story was simple but clear. She'd been traveling, something had gone wrong, she'd crashed here. Where were you going? Marcus asked, though he didn't expect an answer she could give. Instead, Naya pulled herself up, favoring her good leg, and limped to the window. She looked out at the star-scattered sky, her hand pressed against the glass. The longing in her posture was palpable. Home. She was far from home. Marcus brought her a pillow and one of Catherine's old quilts. Blue one with the star pattern she'd finished just before the diagnosis. Naya accepted them with another touch to his hand, that same electric tingle. She settled on the couch, her long legs hanging over the arm, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The sight was so unexpectedly domestic that Marcus felt a laugh bubble up in his throat. "Good night, Naya," he said. "Mar.Cos," she repeated carefully, her voice like wind chimes. Then she added a sound in her own language that he couldn't reproduce but somehow knew meant the same thing. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom but couldn't sleep. Through his window, he could see the faint glow from the eastern field where her craft lay. Someone must have seen it come down. The impact, the light surely someone had noticed. How long before authorities came investigating? How long before he had to make impossible decisions about what to do? Morning came too quickly. Marcus woke to find Pepper sitting on his chest, yowling for breakfast. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a disorienting moment, he wondered if the entire night had been a bizarre dream. Then he heard movement downstairs. He descended to find Naya standing at his kitchen window, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. She'd moved the small table aside and was examining his potted herbs with intense fascination. Her injured leg still troubled her, but she bore weight on it better than the night before. As he watched, she touched a finger to his struggling basil plant. A faint shimmer passed through the leaves, and they straightened, their color deepening to a vibrant green. "What did you just do?" Marcus breathed. Naya turned, startled by his voice. She gestured to the plant, then to herself, then made a growing motion with her hands. The meaning was unclear, but the result spoke for itself. His half-dead basil now looked healthier than when he'd first planted it. The morning passed in careful negotiations. Marcus made breakfast scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, unsure what Naya could eat. She approached the food cautiously, sniffing each item with delicate attention. The eggs she rejected with a slight grimace. The toast she tried, managing a few bites. But when he offered her a bowl of mixed berries from his freezer, her eyes widened with something like joy. She ate them all, including the strawberry tops he usually discarded. After breakfast, Marcus knew he had to check on the crash site. In daylight, the damage might be more visible from the road. He tried to explain this to Naya through gestures and simple words. She grasped the danger immediately, her expression growing tense. She limped to his coat closet and pulled out his old work jacket, holding it up with a questioning look. "You want to come with me?" Marcus asked. "Your leg," but she was already putting the jacket on, her long arms extending past the sleeves. She looked absurd and somehow elegant at the same time. Marcus found a baseball cap and offered it to her. She examined it curiously before putting it on, tucking her strange, flowing hair underneath. With the cap pulled low, she might pass for human at a distance. Maybe. They made their way to the eastern fields slowly, Naya's limp improving with each step. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and early frost. Birds sang in the trees. The natural sounds had returned with daylight. But as they approached the greenhouse, Marcus's heart sank. The damage was worse than he'd remembered. Shattered glass sparkled across the ground like scattered diamonds. The metal frame twisted into impossible shapes. And in the center, Naya's craft sat exposed, its bioluminescent surface dimmed in the sunlight, but still clearly unnatural. Anyone flying overhead would see it instantly. Naya made a soft sound of distress. She approached the craft and placed both hands on its surface, her eyes closing. Marcus watched as patterns of light rippled beneath her palms, spreading across the hull like waves. The craft responded, its glow intensifying briefly before fading again. She pulled her hands back and turned to Marcus, shaking her head. The vessel was too damaged, he understood. It couldn't be moved or hidden easily. We need to cover it, Marcus said, already calculating how much tarp he had in his barn. Make it look like, I don't know, equipment storage. They spent the next 3 hours working together. Marcus hauled tarps and wooden pallets, while Naya, despite her injury, helped arrange materials with surprising strength. He noticed she moved differently than a human would, her joints, bent at slightly different angles, her balance distributed in ways that seemed to defy physics. But she worked tirelessly and gradually. The craft disappeared beneath layers of green tarp weighted down with stones and old lumber dock by noon. It looked like a messy storage pile that someone had abandoned in a greenhouse. Not great, but better than an obvious spacecraft. They were securing the last corner when Marcus heard the sound that froze his blood. Vehicle approaching down his long driveway. He grabbed Naya's arm and pulled her behind the barn, pressing a finger to his lips. She nodded, her eyes wide but alert. Deputy Owen Mills stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his hat. Marcus had known Owen for 15 years. They sometimes played cards at the town bar, had a nodding acquaintance built on mutual respect for boundaries. But as Owen's eyes scanned the property, Marcus saw the professional suspicion beneath the friendly face. "Morning, Marcus," Owen called. "Got a few reports last night about some kind of explosion or crash out this way. You hear anything?" Marcus forced himself to walk out casually, leaving Naya hidden. "Morning, Owen. Yeah, hell of a storm came through. Lightning hit one of my old oaks, took down some branches on my greenhouse. Made quite a noise." Owen's gaze traveled to the collapsed structure. "That looks like more than branches." "Well, it's old. Been meaning to rebuild anyway." Marcus kept his voice steady despite his hammering heart. "Why? Someone complain about the noise?" "Couple folks saw lights in the sky. Thought maybe a small plane went down." Owen walked closer to the greenhouse, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. "You mind if I take a look around?" Every instinct screamed at Marcus to refuse, but that would only increase suspicion. "Sure, help yourself. Fair warning, there's broken glass everywhere." Owen picked his way through the debris, his trained eyes cataloging details. He stopped near the tarp-covered pile, and Marcus's throat tightened. But then Owen's radio crackled with a call about a traffic accident on Route 9. The deputy's attention shifted immediately. "Gotta run," Owen said, already heading back to his car. "But Marcus, if you find anything unusual, or if you need help with cleanup, you call me, all right?" "Will do," Marcus managed. He watched the patrol car disappear down the driveway before releasing the breath he'd been holding. When he turned back, Naya stood at the barn's corner, her violet eyes fixed on the retreating vehicle with an expression of deep concern. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Marcus sat at his kitchen table while Naya sketched on a notepad he'd given her. Her drawings were remarkably detailed geometric patterns, star maps, and what appeared to be technical diagrams of her craft's internal systems. She worked with intense focus, occasionally glancing at him as if checking whether he understood. One drawing caught his attention, a simple illustration of two figures, one tall and slim like Naya, one more humanoid. Between them, she'd drawn a heart symbol universal across galaxies, apparently. But then she'd drawn the tall figure crossed out and tears falling from the remaining figure's face. "You lost someone too," Marcus said quietly. "That's why you're alone," Naya's hand stilled. She touched the drawing, then looked at Marcus with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. Her biology capable of that much, at least. She nodded once, a gesture heavy with grief. They sat in silence as darkness fell outside, two lonely beings from different worlds, connected by loss and the strange circumstance that had brought them together. Marcus thought about calling someone, about doing the right thing. But when Naya's hand crept across the table and her cool fingers wrapped gently around his, he knew he'd already made his choice. Whatever came next, he wouldn't abandon her. Not now, not ever. Outside, unnoticed by either of them, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly past the end of Marcus's driveway, its occupant taking careful note of the property before continuing down the dark country road.